I need you to understand something before I start. I am not someone who gets scared easily. I never have been. I grew up camping in the woods every summer. I have driven alone across 3 states in the middle of the night, and I have never once been the kind of person who checks under the bed or sleeps with the lights on. I'm telling you that because I need you to understand the weight of what I'm about to say next. What happened to me in Harlow County, Montana in the summer of 2019 is the only experience in my entire life that broke something in me that has never fully healed. And the part that still keeps me awake sometimes, the part I have never been able to make peace with, is not what he did. It is how long he had already been doing it before I ever even knew he existed. My name is not important, but you can call me Claire. I was 24 years old that summer, and I was running on empty in every sense of the word. 2 years at a marketing agency that treated its junior staff like disposable batteries. A relationship with someone I had tried to love for longer than I should have. A studio apartment in Portland where the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's alarm clock every morning at 5:45. I was exhausted down to my bones, and I needed out. The opportunity came through my mother's friend, a woman named Deborah Calloway, who she had known since college. Deborah and her husband owned a property outside a small community called Harlow in rural Montana, a farmhouse on 42 acres that had been in her husband's family for 3 generations. They were spending June, July, and August in Portugal and needed someone they trusted to look after the place. Water the garden, feed the 8 chickens, keep the pipes from doing anything catastrophic. In return, I would have the property to myself for 3 months and a payment of $200 a week deposited straight into my account. I asked her exactly one question. Was there good cell service? She laughed and said it was fine most of the time and that the farmhouse had Wi-Fi. I said yes. I drove 14 hours from Portland with my golden retriever Bo in the passenger seat and an embarrassing number of paperback novels in the back. I pulled up to the Calloway property on a Tuesday evening in early June with the sun going down behind the mountains and the whole landscape turning gold and purple, and I sat in my car for a full minute just looking at it. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen in my life. I should have turned around right then. The first 9 days were everything I had needed them to be. I woke up early, drank my coffee on the wraparound porch, read until noon, tended the garden in the afternoon, and fell asleep each night to the sound of absolute nothing. Bo had the time of his life. He had 42 acres to explore, and he came inside every evening muddy and grinning and completely satisfied with his existence. On the morning of the 10th day, I let him out into the backyard while I made coffee. I was standing at the kitchen window watching him the way I always did, and he did his usual thing, nose to the ground, circling the garden beds, sniffing along the fence line. I was not really paying attention. I was thinking about what I wanted to read that day. Then he stopped. Just stopped. Right in the middle of the yard. Every muscle in his body went rigid, and his ears dropped flat against his skull. And he lowered himself slowly into a crouch that I had genuinely never seen him do in the 4 years I had owned him. He was staring at the tree line beyond the back fence, not moving, not making a single sound. I put my coffee cup down. I looked at where he was staring. The trees started about 30 feet beyond the fence. Dense lodgepole pines packed so tightly together that the interior was pure shadow, even in the morning light. And right at the boundary, right where the grass met the first line of trees, there was a section where the vegetation was completely flattened. A wide area, maybe 6 feet across, pressed down low and dead against the earth, the way grass looks after something very heavy has been resting on it. For a long time. I called Bo inside. He came without hesitation, which told me everything I needed to know about how frightened he actually was, because that dog had never come when called in his life unless food was involved. He pressed against my legs the rest of the morning and refused to go back outside. I told myself it was an elk, maybe a bear. I was in Montana. Large animals were part of the reality out here, and I was a city boy who needed to adjust his frame of reference. I believed that for about 3 more days. The footprints reappeared 2 days later on a Thursday. I had gone out early to collect eggs, and as I was coming back around the side of the house toward the back door, I stopped so suddenly I nearly lost my balance. The ground directly outside the back door was soft from 2 days of rain, and pressed into that soft ground were footprints. Human footprints. Large. I wear a size 7, and these were nearly twice the length of my foot. They came from the direction of the trees, crossed the yard, and stopped directly outside the back door in a cluster that told me whoever made them had been standing in that exact spot for long enough to sink deep into the mud. Then they went back the way they came. No other marks. No signs of anything having been disturbed. Just the coming and the standing and the going. I took photographs of every single print. Then I went inside, locked both the back and front doors, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand for about 10 minutes before I called the Harlow County Sheriff's Department. A deputy named Cole arrived about 40 minutes later. He was maybe 30, quiet, methodical. He examined the prints carefully and confirmed they were recent, made within the last 24 hours based on the moisture in the soil. He took his own photographs and wrote things in a small notebook, and then he stood up and looked out toward the tree line for a moment with an expression I could not quite read. He asked me how long I had been staying at the Callaway property. I told him just under 2 weeks. He nodded slowly, like that meant something specific to him. He told me there was not much he could act on without evidence of a direct threat, but that I should keep my doors locked and call immediately if anything else happened. Standard advice. Sensible advice. The kind of advice that feels completely hollow when you are standing in a remote farmhouse 40 minutes from the nearest gas station. Then he said something that he delivered so casually it took me a moment to process it. He said, "You've not had any trouble with the neighbor down the road, have you?" I told him I did not know there was a neighbor. Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise, more like a careful neutrality settling into place the way a mask settles. He said the property at the end of the road, about half a mile through the trees, had someone living on it. Had for a long time. He said the man kept to himself generally, and that there had not been any official trouble in some years. He said, generally. I asked him what that meant. He said to make sure I kept my doors locked, said it again like the first time had not counted, and walked back to his vehicle. I stood on the porch watching him drive away, and I had the specific, unsettling feeling of someone knowing considerably more than they were willing to say out loud. That night, I pushed the heavy oak dresser from the guest room in front of my bedroom door. I lay in the dark with Bo pressed against my side, and I listened to the sounds of the property for the first time with real attention. There is a specific quality of silence in a remote rural place that people who have not experienced it do not fully understand. It is not actually silence. It is layered. Wind through pine needles, the distant sound of the creek on the north side of the property, the settling of old wood, the occasional sound of one of the chickens shifting in the coop. Once you know those sounds, you know them. You can map them without thinking, which means you know immediately when something new enters the layer. At 2:17 in the morning, I know because I looked at my phone, I heard footsteps on the wraparound porch. Slow. Deliberate. Moving from the left side of the porch around toward the front door, then stopping. Bo was already sitting upright beside me in the dark, completely still, not making a sound. We both sat there in the dark and listened and did not breathe. And after what felt like a very long time, the footsteps moved back the way they had come, and then there was nothing. I did not sleep. I did not call the sheriff because I had no proof, and I already knew how that conversation would go. What I did do was order a security camera from Amazon with next-day delivery to the post office in town and drive in the following morning to pick it up. I installed it that afternoon, facing the backyard and the tree line, and angled to catch anyone approaching the back door. 4 nights later, it captured something. At 3:44 in the morning, the camera recorded a figure emerging from the tree line and crossing the yard toward the house. The footage was night vision, that particular shade of green that makes everything look both hyper-real and completely surreal at the same time. The figure was tall. I could not make out a face. It walked with a slow, deliberate gait that seemed completely unhurried, like someone taking an evening stroll, and it crossed the yard and stepped directly up to the back door and stood there. For 11 minutes. 11 minutes standing at my back door in the middle of the night while I slept 20 feet away on the other side of it. Then it walked back across the yard and disappeared into the trees. I watched that footage 4 times sitting at the kitchen table in the morning, and each time I felt the same thing move through me. Not quite fear, something older than fear, something cellular. I drove into Harlow that morning and went directly to the sheriff's department and showed Deputy Cole the footage on my phone. He watched it twice. His jaw was tight in a way that told me he recognized something in what he was seeing, even if he was not going to say so directly. He told me he would follow up and that I should send him the video file. He asked me if I had a safe place I could stay in town for a few nights. I asked him plainly, "Who is the man at the end of the road?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the man's name was Edmund Creel. He said Edmund had lived on the property at the end of the road for as long as anyone in Harlow could remember. Nobody knew his exact age, but the oldest residents of the county recalled him being there when they were children, which put him somewhere north of 70 at least. He did not come into town. He did not interact with local services. How he sustained himself, nobody was entirely sure. Hunting, most likely, the deputy said, and whatever he grew on his land. Then he said, "There was an incident about 15 years ago. A family. They had purchased a small property on the eastern boundary of the Creel land. They were there for 1 winter. I asked what happened to them. He said they left. Suddenly, in the middle of January, left most of their belongings behind. The husband called from somewhere in Idaho a few weeks later and said they were not coming back, and that they were not pressing any charges, and that they did not want to discuss it further." He said, "No charges." I caught those 2 words and held them. I asked what they would have been pressing charges for. Deputy Cole looked at me steadily and said he was not at liberty to discuss the details of a matter that had ultimately not resulted in any formal complaint. I drove back to the farmhouse and started packing. I was not being dramatic, I was not overreacting. I was a 24-year-old man alone on a remote rural property with a man who had been walking across the yard to stand outside my door in the middle of the night, and I was done. I had about half my clothes in the bag when I heard Bo. The sound he made stopped me completely. I have tried to describe it to people since, and I always fall short because there is no clean word for it. It was not a bark, it was not a growl, it was something low and continuous and broken that came from somewhere beneath ordinary dog behavior, something that sounded like grief and terror occurring simultaneously. He was standing at the back door, stiff, trembling slightly, staring at the door like if he looked away something catastrophic would occur. I looked at the security camera feed on my phone. Edmund Creel was standing in the middle of the backyard in broad daylight, just standing there, looking at the house. He was tall, much taller than the footage had suggested, well over 6 feet, with a heaviness to his frame that suggested a lifetime of physical labor. His face at this distance was just a pale shape, but it was pointed directly at the kitchen window, directly at me. I called 911. I whispered the address and told them there was a man on the property who had been stalking me for 2 weeks and that he was currently standing in my backyard. The dispatcher told me to stay away from the doors and windows and stay on the line. She said the nearest unit was 18 minutes out. I moved to the hallway. Bo came with me. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall between the kitchen and the bedroom with my phone pressed to my ear, and I listened. For a while there was nothing. Just the dispatcher's voice asking me every minute or so if I was okay and me whispering yes. Then the back door handle moved, not violently, carefully. The slow, patient rotation of someone who has done this before and is in absolutely no hurry. I heard it from the hallway, and the sound of it, that quiet, mechanical testing, was somehow worse than anything loud could have been. It stopped. A long pause. Then the kitchen window came in. Not the whole thing, just the lower pane, pushed inward with what must have been enormous force because it came out of the frame almost cleanly. A single, sharp, implosive sound, and then the rush of outside air into the kitchen. I ran. I grabbed Bo's collar and I ran for the front door, and I got it open and I cleared the porch steps without touching them, and I ran down the long gravel driveway toward the road with the phone still in my hand and the dispatcher still talking and Bo's paws loud on the gravel beside me. I ran until I hit the road, and then I kept running. I was about a third of a mile down the road when the sheriff's vehicles came around the bend with their lights going, and I stood in the middle of the asphalt waving both arms above my head, and I have never in my life been so relieved to see flashing lights. They searched the property. They found the window. They found his boot prints in the kitchen floor, huge and muddy, tracking from the window toward the hallway where I had been sitting. They found the back door had been worked on, deep, fresh scratches around the lock plate consistent with repeated attempts over multiple nights. And then one of the deputies came and found me sitting in the back of a patrol car with Bo's head in my lap, and he crouched down to my level and told me what they had found in the barn. Edmund Creel had been sleeping in my barn. There was a cleared corner with a bedroll and a tin cup and stacked tins of food and a collection of objects I will not describe in detail because some of them were personal items of mine that had gone missing from the property without me even noticing they were gone. Based on the evidence they found, he had been using that barn as a secondary shelter for years, long before I arrived, long before the Callaways left for Portugal. The Callaways had known about Edmund Creel, and they had sent me there anyway.
Edmund Creel was apprehended on his property the following morning. What investigators found during the search of his land is something I only know partial details of because the case involved multiple jurisdictions and went on for considerably longer than my involvement in it. What I can tell you is that it was serious enough that Edmund Creel will not be leaving a correctional facility for a very long time, if ever. I drove home to Portland without stopping. I called my mother from a gas station in Idaho and could not speak for about 2 minutes. I just held the phone and breathed. Deborah Calloway called me twice. I did not answer either time. I had nothing to say to her that a court could not say more effectively. I moved apartments 3 months later, started over, did the work of putting myself back together piece by piece, the way you do after something like that. 8 months after I left Montana, a padded envelope arrived at my Portland address. No return address. Postmarked Harlow County. Inside was a small notebook, worn, water-damaged at the edges, the cover soft with age. I opened it and found pages of handwritten entries going back years. Dates and observations written in a cramped, careful hand. Every entry was about the Callaway property. He had documented everything. Seasons, weather, the comings and goings of everyone who had ever stayed there. And at the very back of the notebook, on the last written page, was an entry dated the Tuesday I had arrived. It said, "New boy, dog, drives a gray car, parked at 6:43 in the evening, sat in the car for 1 minute before getting out, looked at the mountains first." He had been watching me from the moment I stepped out of my car, before I had even carried a single bag inside. I called Deputy Cole immediately. He told me the notebook had been taken as evidence during the search of Creel's property and that he had no idea how I had received it. The envelope was traced. It had been mailed from Harlow. Edmund Creel had been in custody for 8 months. Someone else had sent it. To this day, nobody knows who.